You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got huge news here out of Fulton County, Georgia. The newest flip is Jenna Ellis. Now, we're going to get to Ellis in just a moment, but I want to get your answer to this question first at the top. We've spoken about this in the past, but it's worth reiterating now in light of Ellis's flip. Might we actually see every co-defendant in Fulton County, Georgia flip on Donald Trump here?
I think the answer is yes. We may see everybody other than Donald Trump actually accept responsibility for their crimes, plead guilty, and agree to testify against whatever defendants might remain. But with each passing day and with each new, guilty plea with cooperation, each new flipper, I think the odds are going up that we may see everybody plead guilty in the Georgia State RICO case, with the exception of Donald Trump.
Okay, so let's get to Ellis herself here. How does her flipping impact Trump? Like, what can she offer prosecutors that no one else can?
So we don't know precisely how much directly incriminating evidence Ellis might have on Donald Trump himself. In other words, we don't know how many meetings she might have been in where Donald Trump was sort of, pulling the nefarious strings on the fake elector scheme, the fraudulent, vote count and all of that. But I think where she is extremely important to the overall prosecution is on the Rudy Giuliani front, because we know that when they went down to Georgia and they addressed the state legislators down in Georgia, spewing out all of this election fraud, this non-existent election fraud, Ellis was right there shoulder to shoulder, supporting and bolstering and propping up Rudy Giuliani's lies. And now, Brian, she pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting Giuliani's false statement. So in other words, in her guilty plea, she said, Rudy, I would like you to meet the undercarriage of the bus. And she gave him up hard. I listened, I actually watched it, and I listened to it back a couple of times, the guilty plea proceedings. And boy, there's so much that Jenna Ellis said that not only hurt Rudy Giuliani, but I think has some important foreshadowing for where else we might see criminal prosecutions.
Okay, so in terms of the Rudy Giuliani of it all, where does this put him? Because I guess the question is, are prosecutors looking to flip him, or are they looking for other co-defendants to flip on him so that they can take Giuliani down?
They're definitely looking for the latter. They're looking to flip everybody on Rudy that they can. Are they looking to flip Rudy? So here's my take on Rudy Giuliani. As a former career prosecutor, I dealt with lots and lots and lots of cooperating witnesses. That is, somebody who themselves committed crimes, decided to plead guilty, flip, and cooperate with my prosecution against the bigger criminal fish. But here's the thing. Not all cooperating witnesses are created equal. There are some who are so ugly that we decide we just don't want to do business on them. If you look really closely at Rudy Giuliani, you might see a whole bunch of little circular bruises all over him. And you know what they are? That is, nobody wants to touch Rudy Giuliani except with the end of a 10-foot pole, because he is just that ugly a witness. I mean, the first cross-examination question of Rudy Giuliani, if the prosecutors ever put him on the stand and Trump's lawyers got to cross-examine him, Rudy Giuliani, didn't you say truth isn't truth? How can this jury believe a word you say? Brian, if it was me, I don't think I would ever want to do business with Rudy Giuliani as a cooperating witness, because there is this phenomenon that if prosecutors put somebody who's so dirty and so cruddy and so irredeemable that you cannot salvage their credibility with any amount of corroborating evidence, then the stink from that witness can attach to the prosecutors, and the jurors can look at the prosecutors like, what are you trying to pull on us, asking us to credit the testimony of a Rudy Giuliani? Now, that's a long run up in, I think my ultimate answer to the question is, the prosecutors may still be willing to flip Rudy Giuliani, let him plead guilty, and enter into a cooperation agreement, but that does not mean they will ever be in a position where they're comfortable putting Rudy Giuliani on the stand.
At the top of this video here, we spoke about the prospect of all of the other co-defendants flipping on Trump, or maybe even just Trump and Giuliani. But what about, some of those otherwise very insidious co-defendants, the John Eastmans, the Jeffrey Clarks, who without them, this whole scheme to overturn the election wouldn't have moved forward. So I guess where do prosecutors draw the line in terms of who they're willing to flip and who they absolutely do want to prosecute?
Yeah, so ultimately, they want and need to hold Donald Trump accountable, and they need to put him in prison because they need to send a signal to the next aspiring dictator that you will not get away with it, and you will see the inside of the prison if you try to, bring an end to our democracy. But I think everybody from Trump on down is a slightly different story. Now, I believe that many of them will see the inside of a prison. And I think Jack Smith, more than anybody else, will appreciate the need to deter the sort of corruption at the upper echelons of government, like the Mark Meadows, the John Eastmans, the Jeffrey Clarks, the Rudy Giulianis. But where exactly prosecutors draw that line, different prosecutors can draw the line in different places. But here is some of the beauty of what we have seen with the defendants that have flipped. And it really highlights the wisdom of Fani Willis's tactical approach and the way she brought this big, sweeping 19 co-defendant RICO case, because she got a guilty plea she flipped Kenneth Chesebro. Who can he most directly give her? Well, the John Eastmans of the world, because these were the two who were kind of the architects of the fake elector scheme. She flipped Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell is going to be instrumental in providing incriminating evidence against Rudy Giuliani, because they were both out there bringing these bogus lawsuits across the country, trying to undermine the election's results. And she can also bring incriminating evidence to the prosecutors about Donald Trump, because she was in the Oval Office for some of these meetings when they were cooking up this nefarious plot. And now she broke Jenna Ellis, brought her on board as a cooperating witness. That is, again, somebody who she's going to be able to use to leverage Rudy Giuliani. So she has a tactical plan. She has an overarching strategy, and she seems to be kind of moving through it in what makes a lot of sense to me as a former career prosecutor.
And by the way, just to build on exactly that, her first flip was Scott Hall, which was somebody who was instrumental in the whole Coffee County voting machines scheme, and that was instrumental in getting Sidney Powell, who was also involved in that very scheme. So the way she's doing it, to your exact point, is very tactical, and it's working out in exactly the way that I guess she would imagine it would. Glenn, would prosecutors ever offer Donald Trump a plea deal, or is that not on the table because the whole point of these deals is to be able to prosecute Trump to the fullest extent of the law?
If I were involved in making that prosecutorial decision, there is no way on earth I would offer Donald Trump a plea deal, apart from a plea deal that said, you plead guilty to all 91 counts in every jurisdiction and you will die in prison, but we might be able to accommodate you with respect to in what facility you get to serve your prison term, because the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which is ultimately where Donald Trump will serve the sentence that is undoubtedly coming his way, they have facilities all over the country. Some are better than others. And, that might be the only concession I would be willing to make to Donald Trump. I don't believe for a minute that the federal prosecutors in particular will negotiate a plea agreement that would keep Donald Trump out of prison. I don't think that's going to happen, because that will serve as no kind of deterrent to tomorrow's aspiring dictator. And frankly, it will serve as no kind of punishment for Donald Trump. I do not think they'll let him get away with home detention, because as we've discussed before, that's basically sentencing somebody to, binge watch Netflix and order DoorDash. That's no kind of punishment for somebody who tried to bring an end to the American experiment. So I don't think the prosecutors are all that interested in negotiating a plea deal with Donald Trump. I think they're going to try to negotiate plea deals with everybody else to ensure that they can hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes.
Yeah, if being sentenced to staying at home and watching Netflix and ordering DoorDash was the punishment for some major crime, man, I can just go out and commit Grand Theft Auto every day. My life wouldn't change that much. Glenn, finally, can you speak on the lenient punishments that these co-defendants are getting, the Sidney Powells and and Kenneth Chesbro and Scott Hall and now Jenna Ellis. We're talking about 5 to 6 years of probation, a $5,000 fine, an apology letter, considering the insurrectionists, the boots on the ground, who were there because of those very people, are currently being sentenced to actual prison time.
I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. Now, I'm not criticizing District Attorney Willis for making the choice, the decision to plead some of these early characters out with no jail time, a sentence to probation, because she's got to build her case against all 19 co-defendants all the way up to the big orange blowfish himself, Donald Trump. I think Jack Smith will take a very different approach to cooperating witnesses. I think, for example, when he gets around to prosecuting Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesbro, they may already have struck deals with Jack Smith, mind you. If I were their lawyer, I would not have let them plead guilty down in Georgia, because that is handing the gift of sharply incriminating evidence to Jack Smith.
Who, by the way, can he use what he's finding out in Fulton County to help his own case?
Absolutely. These people went into court, raised their right hand, swore to tell the truth, and said they committed these crimes and want to plead guilty. That's directly admissible evidence against them in other criminal proceedings. So I suspect the lawyers for people like Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis and Kenneth Chesbro have already been communicating with Jack Smith and the federal prosecutors. Heck, they might have cooperation deals already signed, perhaps even filed in court under seal, such that the public doesn't know about them. Because if they didn't, they are so exposing themselves to a successful prosecution in DC that I think there has to be some protection for them in DC before they jumped out and pleaded guilty down in Georgia. But going back to these probationary sentences, I don't like them at all. And I think after Sidney Powell pleaded guilty, you actually heard the lawyers for some of the January 6th defendants, some of the boots of the insurrection, the people who answered Donald Trump's call to attack the Capitol, the people who answered Sidney Powell's call to release the Kraken. Literally, some of these defendants in DC, the boots of the insurrection, said, we were there releasing the Kraken exactly as Sidney Powell and Donald Trump directed us to do. We go to prison, and the people who ordered the crimes get probation, not 1 minute of jail time. That, to me, is deeply unjust and unequal. Now, I do think it will be remedied by Jack Smith when he takes on the suits of the insurrection, which he will do. I have no doubt about that. He's going after Donald Trump by himself, first and foremost, as the only charged defendant in DC, but he will get around to indicting the 6 unnamed co-conspirators that are in that Donald Trump indictment. Of that, I have no doubt. But still, it feels like an unequal application of the law, that the boots of the insurrection who are following orders are going to prison, and the lawyers, the privileged class who pleaded guilty down in Georgia, are escaping prison time entirely.
And just one quick question to build on exactly that point. Is this something that we would see in an entirely new case brought by Jack Smith, or would they be added as some type of a superseding indictment in the existing case against Donald Trump in DC?
Great question. I think Jack Smith's prosecution of Donald Trump was built for speed. That's why he only indicted Donald Trump. He will not now be adding additional defendants to the Donald Trump indictment, because that would bog everything down.
Okay.
It would actually cause the March 4 trial date to be vacated by the judge, and the trial would be pushed well into the future. So we're going to see a subsequent separate indictment of those 6 unnamed but identified co-conspirators in the Trump indictment, and perhaps many others.
Okay. Obviously, a lot to stay on top of here, especially given how quickly things are moving in Fulton County with one flip after the next. These dominoes are falling. So if you want to stay on top of this stuff, as soon as it breaks, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Taylor Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.